Hi all, my name is Lee. Welcome back to the channel. So currently I'm building the Lee C guitar #1. So it's my first production guitar that I'm going to attempt to sell. So I've already done the body and I've started the neck, as you can see. So watch my previous videos for that. However, the time's come now where I want to start putting the neck carve and the fretboard radius on the neck. And to do the neck carve, I actually I built a jig, a neck carve jig, to get that particular task done. Makes it a lot easier to keep it nice and round and smooth. So what I want to do is, I've seen a lot of people, I've got a video on how I built this jig, but a lot of people are still asking questions. So what I'll do now is I'll try and take you through this jig just to try and explain it a bit more. So hopefully you can go and make one yourself. In the future, I do plan to deconstruct and reconstruct this jig just so I can show everyone again how it's all done, and I'll probably do it properly and give you the correct measurements I use, so on and so forth. So for now, let's take a closer look at this, and I'll try and give you an explanation on how it works, and then we'll get the jig set up and we'll cut the neck carve into the neck. So I've tipped the jig up and hopefully you can see all the jig in the frame. Sorry, my lens isn't wide enough to get a nice close-up shot with a wide lens, but hopefully the explanation will help. So basically what we have is we have this piece of wood that the neck gets stuck on, and the wood rotates around an axis with 2 pins in either end, and attached to those pins are these sort of cams, these profile cams, which run against a couple of ball bearings. So the idea is this will just rock on its axis. However, depending on the shape of the cam, because this is attached with a piece of elastic or springs, it means it rotates, but it keeps the shape of the cams at either end. Now, of course, on a guitar neck, one end is thinner than the other. So this is the thin end, the headstock end, and this is the thicker end. So how this jig works, first of all, we need to keep this piece of wood perfectly level when it's pressed, the cams are pressed against the pivots. So the width of the neck is defined by the width of the cam on either end. So the diameter of the cam at the width should be wider than at the heel than it is at the headstock. So I don't know if you can see, but this cam, I believe, if I remember correctly, is about 80 millimeters diameter, whereas this cam started as 100 meters diameter. 100 millimeters diameter. So if you now think you have 2 different size cams on either end, that would actually put this at a slight angle. So this is key. The larger cam, you need to cut the profile down so the radius from the center of the pivot to the top is exactly the same distance as the other side. So if you imagine this is an 80 millimeter cam circle, and this is a 100 millimeter circle, then I've cut the top of this one off and I've cut it down 10 millimeters, because obviously you're talking about radius. So this one is now 80 millimeters high, it's 40 millimeters high radius, matching this one. However, this one is still wider to match the wider part of the heel. I know it sounds really complicated. I hope that makes sense, but I'll take you through it again in a completely separate video, and I'll show it in diagrams and things. But hopefully that gives you an idea of how it all works. So then the next thing to consider is when you put the router on, the router needs to be correctly centered. So of course you stick the neck on here first. I just use a double-sided tape. It's called carpet tape for sticking carpets down. It's incredibly strong. Then you put some sort of piece of wood that you've made as a slider, and then the router sits in here on there. Now of course you just then need to center the router to the center line of the neck. And once that's done, you can just stick something on the sides to keep the router in the position, and then you move it along. So of course what happens is you then rock this and it follows the profile of the two cams, thus cutting out the neck. So hopefully that makes a bit more sense. But what I'll do is I'll set this all up and then I'll make the cuts on the neck and we can see the final result. So as you can see, I've stuck the neck in now and it's nice and firm and it's perfectly centered. So the center of the neck should run between the two bolts at either end. So this is perfectly centered. The next thing we need to do is make sure the router is centered on that center line. So I'll put my plate on. What I do is I can get my router, and I've got some more double-sided sticky tape here. So then I lower the router until it's just about touching the wood. And then I move it left and right until I get directly on the center line. And once I think I'm there, I just watch the end of the router bit just brushing the top surface of the wood, and I'm making sure it follows the center line all the way down. And it looks pretty good. So at the end of it, you should have something that looks a little like this. So all I've done at this end, just because I need to contour this, is I've just raised the router just to take off a little bit of the material, just to make it easier for me to get a contour on there. And I'll also need to do the same with the heel joint. But that's worked pretty well. It looks pretty good. So it's just a matter of hand sanding this now down to size. So as you can see, the radius jig, the neck carve jig, I don't use it to finish the neck, obviously. I sort of slightly oversize it, and then it's just a matter of putting all the contours in with strips of sandpaper. So I've been doing that. I'm just going to finish it off, getting rid of all the sharp lines. So I'll just carry on doing this until it's almost done. But I won't finish the neck just yet. What I'll do next is I'll put it into the fretboard radius jig. I'll put the radius on the fretboard and level it before I do the final sanding and finishing. So let's just carry on with that. So here's the radius jig, similar setup to before, but obviously this rocks and it's exactly 10-inch radius from the pivot points down here. So up to the fretboard is 10 inches. So all I do is I work my way along, just rocking this back and forth, slowly carving out the radius. That's how it works. It's pretty simple. So let's get on and do that now. So after using the two jigs I have, I've now sanded down the top of the fretboard after doing the fretboard radius jig, just using a 10-inch radius block. So I've removed all of the router marks from it, and I've also gone over it with 3000 grit to make it nice and smooth. As you can see, what I've also done is I've drilled the holes in ready to put my inlays in. I've already put the small dots in, so after the 12th fret I just use the normal pearl dots, which are 6mm. But before the 12th fret and up to the 12th fret, I actually surround the dot in a small piece of aluminium, just to make a slightly different style, just to, you know, make it my own sort of thing. So I've made a few of those already, but let's jump on the lathe and make the last aluminium insert that then I can put the dot inside, and I'll show you how I do that. So let's take a look now. So I've got a piece of aluminium rod in there. I've already drilled into it 6mm obviously to put the pearl dot inside, but the outer diameter of the aluminium is 8mm. So all I just need to do is part one off of there, and then we will polish up the dot and we'll start to put the inlays in. So I just put the aluminium circle on a flat surface, put a polished dot inside it, and then I'll just put a little bit of glue on the back, and it just seeps down the edges and glues it in. And once the glue's dry, I just take a piece of 3000 grit sandpaper, and then I polish the bottom of the dot, well, the top of the dot I should say. Now I just put a tiny bit of glue inside each hole and then push one of the dots into it one by one. So the neck is pretty much complete now. I'm really happy with how this is looking. I've already gone over and prepared the frets, so everything's nice and smooth on the edge. I didn't bother filming that. That's a really slow task. That's several hours of careful filing. But everything feels smooth. I've already run over it with some alcohol as well, but I'll give it one last clean just to be sure. But the next step is now to put some oil on this. So now it's all ready to go. Everything's nice and smooth. I'll just clean it up one more time with some alcohol and then we'll get it oiled. So let's do that now. So I've got some alcohol just to clean it off with, and a relatively clean, soft rag. So I'm just going to wipe over the entire body just to remove any last pieces of fret dust and any wood and sawdust that may be on there. So let's just get some of that on there. Alcohol is good to use because it evaporates almost immediately and it doesn't swell up the wood or anything like that. So it works really well just for cleaning the last bits of sort of sweat and grease off the wood before you oil. Okay, so this is always my favourite part. So I've got some Danish oil. I'm going to put Danish oil on this neck. So I've given it a shake. And let's just apply this to the first coat. Usually the first coat has to be pretty thick, and we'll let that dry. I buff it after an hour, but then you leave it for another 5 hours just to dry properly before you apply the second coat. So let's get on and do that now. So here it is, almost finished. I say almost finished because there is something else I want to do to this, so I am going to have to refinish the headstock. But this is how it looks so far. I'm really pleased with how it's turned out. It's looking really nice. So the one thing I forgot is to put some sort of branding on the headstock. And I've got an idea on what I'm going to do for that. It does involve cutting the headstock, so I will have to refinish slightly and I'll have to be really careful now I've oiled it. But I'll finish the video here. Join me on the next video where we start making the knobs, making the strap nuts, and also putting some sort of identification and serial number in the headstock. So I'll see you on the next video. Cheers.